If you're a veteran that's served, but you haven't gone through the claims process because you've told yourself, well, I don't want to take from another veteran, this is going to be the video for you. Because VA disability isn't a fixed pot of money and you're not actually going to be taking from any other veteran. And in fact, when people have talked about their claims and their compensation, this is actually an earned entitlement that is protected to help you and your family. And today in this video, I want to talk about why this is not only true, but this is actually a really big impact that veterans need to be considering for themselves long-term and things that you can be doing right now. And real quick, before we start the video, I do have a full course and a free email list down below on the VA claims process. If you want to learn more, go check that out. But let's jump into the video. So last year I got in contact with a veteran who's almost 6 years old, who came from a different era as a veteran than I did. He came from the area of you suck it up as a soldier or as a service member. And that was kind of the upbringing they had during their career. And today, this veteran was suffering in many ways. And there was ways that I had seen that I was really curious about why they had never been to the VA. Because this person had served, actually deployed 2 different times, and had actually never signed up for the VA. And I was really curious on why that was. And when looking at their lifestyle, it was clear that they were used to having a level of suffering since leaving service. And so I thought to myself, well, it's not that surprising that they don't want to go to the VA, but did they have a bad experience at the VA, or have they not ever been, and therefore they're just ignoring something? Maybe they don't know what's the educational gap that they have. Why was this veteran not getting taken care of? And as I dove into this story with this person, I understood that they did not have education based on the time frame that they got out. The VA was at a very different spot in the 90s when they left the service than it was for me. And as you all know, as you found me on YouTube, there was no resources online from anybody that's a company, an individual, a person. There was nothing out there in the world to explain what the VA actually does for a person. So to provide a little bit more background, this person had left the military and gone into being a civil servant, working and doing a very similar job as a contracted government employee, and then going into the full-time GS positions throughout their career. And so what they'd done is they'd said, well, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, I haven't needed healthcare, and I didn't really know anything about the VA, so what was the point? I didn't really need to do anything about it at the time. And so as we dove in more, despite the fact that this person had left the service with injuries and with some areas that they needed to probably get looked at, they kind of put it to the side as wanting to be done. They were burned out from their time in service. I very much understand that. They were suffering from some mental health, and they were not in the right mind headspace to even look into some of these things until issues started arising further down the line. And now for the first time, this veteran was struggling to pay some bills for healthcare because they're going to things outside of their network, going to specialists and doctors and talking through and understanding. And so now for the first time, they're going outside of their network, paying for bills, and hospitals, going to specialists for treatments. And all the while, they don't have the VA to use. And they're coming back to the conclusion that says, I wish I would have gone to the VA in the first place. And now if this is you going through this process, it's not too late. This person did go through the claims process and they are living a much better life. But let's jump through some of the myths on how they got to this stage in case you are in this category or you know somebody that is and you want to go through the claims process and understand why the VA is the biggest benefit that you have earned. So let's talk about the first myth, which is if I get paid, another veteran won't, and they might be worse off than me. And this is just undeniably false because Congress has set aside money within the VA's budget that will always go to every service member that's able and needing this funding. VA disability compensation is an appropriated entitlement, and Congress passed funding laws that make it so that it's not capped by just the funding amount from the VA, and that is going to be taken from another person if you go through this claims process. And on top of that, disability compensation itself specifically is a mandatory spending amount that they need to actually use. These tax-free monthly payments for service-connected conditions are really supposed to be used because they have been allotted for every service member. And on top of that, this budget does scale with need. The caseloads actually do change over time. If we have a more influx of people coming through the service that are then getting out of the service at certain periods of time, the VA is actually going to have more funds set aside by Congress, hopefully predictably in the future to do so and continue this process, but they're set aside. They're ready to go even if there are changes in these numbers. And let's go to myth number 2, which most people say it's been too long and I think I've missed my chance. And this is just another blatant myth because there's no actual statutory limit on time for you to make a claim in the first place. You can apply years or even decades later. And albeit it might be harder, but it's not actually possible to do so. And depending on what you use, if you use something like the PACT Act, if you use other areas of evidence that have been provided, there's still the same benefit. You've just lost time on your side, so things can be harder. And if you've been denied before, supplemental claims are actually a really good way to reopen, to keep that initiation date that you have. And so it can be backdated at a certain extent. So it's never actually too late, technically, in any capacity to go after your claims if you feel that you need to do so. And myth number 3 that I've heard and seen is that people say, well, I didn't really serve compared to other people. I didn't do as much as this guy. And this is such a painful one to hear because everybody has this ego of some capacity that their service was actually not as important as somebody else's. I wish I got to do more on my deployment that I did go on. And in fact, I wish I got to deploy multiple times, and I wish that I had the ability to kind of get in more action than I was. And despite that, I don't look at Green Berets or Navy SEALs or people that were in combat as somebody that's different than me as a veteran, but it took a long time to get this out of my own personal mindset. And it's challenging. Like, it's challenging when veterans eat each other alive and make that comparison, say you're a slick sleeve, you've never deployed, or you weren't in this kind of combat, or you weren't deployed in 2007. And it's like, well, I was in high school in 2007. Like, I'm sorry I didn't deploy because I was born younger than you. And then when I went on my deployment, I didn't get to pick what I got to do or where I got to go. So this myth is a really big mindset shift for people, because that is such a toxic way to look at what the rest of your life will become, because the rest of your life as a veteran might involve many ups and downs that you're not used to. Just a transition out alone is one beginning step, but living your life as a civilian with possible ailments or injuries for the rest of your life could be 40, 50 years at a minimum. And so how could you possibly let what other people have said about you, what other communities have said, that the toxicity of people that are currently in service that don't even understand on the outside what life will be like for them, don't let that reflect on you. And that myth is going to be easier said than done, harder to break, and honestly one of the hardest pieces of advice to try to give to people is, it's not going to matter. Take care of yourself. That's all that really matters. And because when your care is stable, there's a couple things that fall into place. You're going to be there more for your family, mentally, physically, and spiritually. If you have compensation, you are resilient to job changes that fluctuate in the workforce, because this isn't like the military. You don't know your career path, what it's going to be, what changes can happen, and depending on what you're doing for work, this monetary amount could really save the stress levels that you have moving forward as a civilian and transitioning into whatever path you might go down. But we have to keep in mind that VA compensation is not a handout, and it's something that everybody has earned with their service if they have injuries or ailments from that time in service. And I have to admit, it is very true and likely that the suck it up mindset kept you alive at times, kept you motivated, kept you to be a good leader, kept you to be a good soldier, sailor, Marine, Navy SEAL, whatever it may be, airman. That is great for when you're on the job, when you're young, when you need to be doing that as part of that service obligation. But for the next 10 or 20 years, these compounding effects of those injuries is not going to matter that you sucked it up and you continue to suck it up throughout the rest of your life. You're at a losing streak continuing to think like that, and taking care of yourself is the best way to get past this. And if you watch videos on my channel, then you know that I was not an active duty service member for my whole career. I spent time on active duty orders at multiple occasions, once on deployment, once on another rotation, multiple trainings in the summer, obviously my job training, and then even on COVID orders for the state of Pennsylvania, on top of doing riot control orders as well. I had spent 3.5 years of active duty time within my 8-year window being a military officer in the National Guard. So it is hard to say that all service is equal, because it's definitely not. And compared to some guys in the National Guard or reserves, I've done a lot. And then compared to some guys on active duty, I've barely scratched the surface. But at the end of the day, just like you, just like me, just like many of your friends, you signed your name on the dotted line to serve this country. And despite what anybody else thinks, that you gave up a part of you some way, physically, mentally, or spiritually, that you won't really be able to get back. And to be honest, I've continued to struggle with this to this day. There's things that I regret about my service that I just wish I did better or wish I could have done differently. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with mental health for me as an individual, and for what I need to work on as a person. But at the end of the day, I couldn't be more happy and proud of myself that I was able to change my mindset and look at compensation in the VA in a way that was very truthful and honest and available for me to use, because I've actually had to use it more than I've realized. And having that change of mindset helped me to actually want to provide and give back and look at the veteran community and say, what areas are missing? And I created a full course that you can see down below for just that reason, to look at viewing your compensation in a real way and a step-by-step process that's attainable for any person to do. I did this work for you so you don't have to. If you want to go check out those links, you can. And if you just want to look at my free guide, I have an email sign up with a free guide. The point of me making this video and the point of being on this channel is to not only inspire veterans to be able to take care of themselves by giving them the right information, but it's looking at the deeper problem of the veteran community. That we say we have a brotherhood and then we go on the internet and people will stab each other in the back, say that people are doing fraudulent things. And yes, there are those things that happen. I do not promote you trying to make money from the VA for nothing. But please understand that we need to be the biggest supporting advocates for each other and ourselves to stop that stigma of that toxicity that can ruin other people's lives when they get out. There are times where I feel like I've had friends that were there for me when I was transitioning out of the military and I was kind of having some ups and downs and struggles. And then there was also times where I got feedback from people that personally know me, that haven't left the military yet, that really almost changed my mindset about being very negative when I was currently being positive. And I try to ignore comments online if something does come about that, might be trying to personally attack my character or what I'm doing with these videos. But at the end of the day, I've wanted to take care of myself. And now that I see the open landscape of what being a civilian long-term will be, I see the struggles that veterans like yourselves might come up and start facing. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something today and that it's hopefully inspired you to look a little deeper at what you can do to continue being motivated about your service despite the uncertainty and despite the things that have probably happened to you that's made you a different person physically, mentally, spiritually than you were before. So if you want to learn more, subscribe to my channel and watch this video up here for the next one.